Floatation tanks and higher consciousness. I've been talking about flotation tanks for the last 30 plus years, but I've never done a video on them, so here it is. Flotation tanks are sensory deprivation tanks where you get into a pod or tank full of Epsom salt water, close the lid, and float weightlessly for an average of 1 hour or more. The flotation tank was developed by John C. Lilly, the world's premier dolphin researcher and also a consciousness researcher such as myself. Lilly used the tanks in combination with psychedelic drugs such as LSD and ketamine. I don't recommend that. I don't do drugs myself because I believe all the spaces that you can enter with drugs, you can also enter without drugs and then some. Because you actually have all these chemicals within your own brain and body. It's just a matter of activating them. John Lilly, later in his life, in his research, he came to the same conclusion. You can go higher without drugs because drugs tend to shift you horizontally, but not vertically. Even so, Lilly's books are interesting for people who like to research consciousness, such as myself. But if you want a more basic and clean book on floating, I've recommended the Book of Floating on my website under recommended books. The Book of Floating by Michael Hutchinson. It'll give you a great introduction to what it's all about, or simply use this video as your introduction. A few weeks before making this video, I posted about floating tanks on my social media account, and someone commented that flotation tanks make it easier for demons to enter you. And I've heard this particular piece of propaganda before. It's one of many ways people are kept from exploring their inner self, who they are. And my response to that comment is, you're talking to the person who wrote a book titled Clearing Entities. Someone who's researched the topic his entire life, so much so he could write a book about it. So when I reject this claim, I do so as someone who believes in the reality of entities or demons or jinn. Okay, as someone who teaches that you need to get rid of them. So my rebuttal is, when you're floating, you're drenched in Epsom salt. Drenched in it. And I say that few things are more repelling to lower astral entities than salt. You can read about this in almost all ancient traditions, from way over in the Pacific to the mythology of the Native Americans, ancient European folklore, different religions. It's all there. People used to take salt baths not only to rid themselves of illnesses, but also entities. And maybe there's a connection between illnesses and entities. They used to sprinkle salt in front of their doors and their gates. They'd throw salt over their shoulder for good luck. And I'm not saying I do any of this. I'm saying that it's traditional cultural knowledge that salt wards off negative spirits. So it's kind of ignorant to say that going into a floating tank attracts negative spirits. Quite the opposite. Secondly, an entity can never, ever enter you without your conscious consent, without you actually working on it. I explain this in great detail in my book, Clearing Entities. Flotation tanks are some of the best places to pray, to meditate, because there's no obstruction or distraction whatsoever. The channel is clear. Opposition to flotation tanks has also come from the science. Back when flotation tanks started going commercial and really started spreading, the science put a stop to it because they noticed, oh my goodness, this is waking too many people up. Too many people are becoming conscious and aware human beings who know their inner self. We can't have that. So the science started publishing all kinds of scientific studies saying that you'd go insane if you go floating, because these are unnatural cognitive states and whatnot. And at the same time, they started putting out science fiction movies, several actually, that showed people either going crazy in the tank, or one movie showed how a guy turned into a beastly, primitive caveman, monkey man, because he went into the tank. So you had all this propaganda back in the 70s trying to stop the movement, and they did successfully stop it for the mainstream, for the normie, but there were always those among us who knew it's propaganda, and we did it anyway. We went floating anyway, and look where we turned up. Yes, people who've spent a lot of time in floating tanks do have so-called crazy thoughts, because they're capable of thinking outside of the box, outside of the norm, outside of the thing we've been culturally boxed into. We've released surface level thoughts and are capable of going beyond. Okay, so regardless of all that propaganda from religious side and from the science, here's what really happens. The most important thing that happens in the tank is that your body no longer has muscle resistance. And when you no longer have muscle resistance, it activates self-healing modalities that are only present when there's no more resistance. That's why many of the emotional clearing and self-healing processes I do with people are about releasing resistance, letting go of that muscle tension, because it's all stored in the muscles. But in the flotation tank, this happens all by itself. Flotation tanks are more deeply relaxing than massage, more relaxing than meditation, more relaxing than swimming or floating on a rubber mattress in the pool. Not that I have anything against any of this, massage is great, but floating goes a couple of levels deeper, not just one or two levels, a couple of levels deeper. I felt sore from playing tennis, gone into a tank, and come out of the tank without the sores. Sores that would normally take maybe 2 days to heal. Your beliefs and emotions are stored in the muscles as frozen energy. And the weightlessness eventually releases any pent up and stored negative energies, even if you don't consciously work on it while you're in the tank. The second most important thing about tanks is the sensory deprivation. Traditionally, you can't see or hear anything in floating tanks. Now, most floating centers offer music, aromas, light displays inside their tanks. I highly recommend you reject all of that, because it's in the sensory deprivation that you can properly view the contents of consciousness, the contents of your mind, the body, the mind-spirit-body connection. There's really no better place for it. Void of any distraction whatsoever, that's all that's left. And a lot of people are going to get bored and frustrated and, be resisting at first. But as you go into your second, third, fourth float, you release all of that eventually, and you just let go and you allow who you are to arise. And who you are is a whole lot of beliefs, thoughts, identifications, self-definitions, concepts. And you can observe these, allow them to pass through, and eventually things just process themselves in the tank. Witnessed by the observer, the fair witness, that's you. There's a part of you that researcher John Lilly called the fair witness. That's the aspect of you that's higher self that can just observe calmly without resistance, judgment, past experiences, desires, and whatnot, the fair witness. And it's the fair witness that allows all this to process by not intervening. People assume that I meditate because I talk about the benefits of meditation in my books, and I provide a lot of guided meditations on my members only website. But people assume too much. I haven't formally meditated in more than 10 years. I barely ever meditate at all, unless I'm attending some event where meditation is required. And the reason I don't formally meditate is because the states you want to achieve in meditation are much easier achieved in a flotation tank. You don't have to meditate for hours to get into the right state, because the tank puts you there right away. The sensory deprivation puts you smack at the center of consciousness. You're able to view the theater of the mind, view your beliefs, and easily release them because there's no muscle resistance. You see what I'm saying? It almost happens automatically. And then sometimes you just drift off and you have no idea what's happening. Sometimes you get scared because of stuff that comes up, but anything that does come up is a reflection of you, was attracted by you. So don't be scared of yourself. And sometimes you consciously visualize something, or consciously pray, or consciously stretch your imagination, consciously experiment, consciously stretch your body, enter new spaces of consciousness. Sometimes you lucid dream. You'll find that lucid dreaming, which is dreaming while knowing that you're dreaming, is easier in a flotation tank. It's easy to take a nap there, but even though you're taking a nap, you somehow know that you're actually sleeping because a part of you stays aware because of the unfamiliar surroundings. You don't want to drown. You don't worry about drowning, but that's why it's easier to lucid dream. A lot of people ask me, how can I lucid dream? Fred, why have you removed the lucid dreaming audios off your website? Well, the reason I removed them is because they're not as effective as I wanted them to be. And when I have a product in my membership section that's not as effective as I want it to be, I remove it. But I'll tell you what's effective. Floaters tend to have an easier time accessing the lucid dreamscape, the other side, the non-physical. And as you get really advanced in floating, you can travel to other realms without drugs. I do it without drugs. You can have out-of-body experiences. Now, I'm not guaranteeing or promising this. I'm just saying it's something that's more likely to happen when your body is super duper relaxed and you're floating weightlessly. But even more important than all of this far out stuff is what it does for your health. Most people who get out of a tank and look into the mirror, they'll see that their eyes look softer. The eyes are shining. And that right there is evidence that something happened. They're not quite sure what happened, but they look good. They look happy. They look at ease. A lot of people mistake being dull and apathetic with inner peace, with being relaxed, but they're not the same thing. If you're truly at inner peace, your eyes are shining and you're effective. You're able to act. I know a lot of so-called success people, they wouldn't go to the flotation tank because they think it would make them lazy or apathetic or dull. Just lying, I don't have time to just lie around, do nothing. And I say that a state of peace, peace of mind, these shining eyes, don't make you dull. They make you more productive, more creative, more effective. You have time, you go into the tank, you have time to gain perspective, to find out who you are. Is what I'm doing what I really want? Is that really who I am? Where has my attention been in the last weeks? Is that where I want my attention to be? And if you never ask yourself these questions, because you're constantly, you gotta do something, gotta work, don't have time to flow, don't have time to meditate, then you're gonna be in a rat race instead of successful. I've been floating since the 1990s. Altogether, I floated maybe 500 times. Most of that having been in the 90s and the 2000s, not so much in the 2010s, 2020s, but I still do it once or twice a year because through daily life, certain resistances and thoughts do accumulate. So I go in once or twice a year just to release all of that, and then I'm good again for another year. But if you've never been to a tank and never explored yourself and consciousness like that, I recommend you go much more often, maybe once a month, even once a week, maybe even twice a week, whatever's good for you. Is there any negative side effect of floating? No, unless you're traumatized and don't know how to handle trauma. So if you've been through unaddressed trauma, I recommend you don't go floating. You go get healing and then you go floating. Otherwise, you're going to have stuff come up because everything is visible. You can't lie to yourself. While you lie, you can't lie to yourself because everything that you are and that is within yourself is there, right in front of you. Every inauthenticity, everything really. And if you have unaddressed trauma, that comes up. And some people can work through that in the tank, and they do, but it's not something I necessarily recommend. One slight negative side effect is that you might be in such a relaxed, confident state that the opposite of that becomes obvious and visible to you. You know, you might come out of the tank and go shopping, and you might see people who are very anxious, and you realize just how anxious they are, something you did not notice before. Be like, oh my goodness, what is going on with these people? They're just, yeah, you better. And that could be a slight negative effect of floating, the contrast between your chilled state, totally in control, versus seeing all the anxious people around you. However, if you're in a truly relaxed state, it won't bother you quite that much. If it bothers you, you're not that relaxed yet. So go check if there's a flotation tank in your area, and if there is, you are in luck. Floating centers vary in quality and also in cleanliness. Make sure that the one you choose is clean, that they exchange their water after every float, putting in new water, getting out the old water. Make sure they smell good, look good, feel good. My name is Frederick Dodson. I trust you'll enjoy your float.